The black Mercedes pulled up to the small roadside diner, its shiny paint looking out of place against the faded building. Richard stepped out, adjusting his expensive watch. He was tired from the long drive and needed coffee before heading to his next business meeting. The diner was one of those old places that time seemed to forget. Red vinyl booths, a checkered floor, and the smell of burnt coffee mixed with fried food. Richard didn't usually stop at places like this, but his driver had taken a wrong turn, and this was the only spot for miles. As he walked toward the entrance, something caught his attention. A small figure sat on the sidewalk near the diner's corner. A little girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, with her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore a faded blue jacket that was too big for her thin frame, and her sneakers had seen better days. What really caught his eye was the violin. It was old and scratched, resting against her shoulder as she drew the bow across the strings. A worn violin case lay open in front of her with just a few coins scattered inside. Richard stopped and watched for a moment. The music wasn't bad, actually, but he'd seen dozens of street performers in the city. Most of them were just looking for easy money, he thought. This girl was probably the same. His business partners, 2 men in suits who had been riding with him, came up behind him. They were in the middle of discussing a deal worth millions. "What's the holdup?" asked Tom, one of his associates. Richard nodded toward the girl. "Just another street performer. Probably makes more in a day than most people realize," Tom laughed. "They all have a sob story, don't they?" The girl's music stopped. She had noticed them staring. Her dark eyes looked at Richard with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not begging, not hopeful, just watching. Something about her steady gaze annoyed him. Maybe it was because she didn't look away. Maybe it was because he was already in a bad mood from the detour. Or maybe it was the way his partners were watching, waiting to see what he would do. Richard walked closer. The girl didn't move, just held her violin and waited. "So how much do you make doing this?" Richard asked, his voice carrying that edge he used in boardrooms. "Enough for lunch sometimes," she answered quietly. "Lunch." He repeated the word like it was funny. "You know, I pay more for a cup of coffee than you probably make in a week." His partners chuckled behind him. The girl said nothing, just looked at him with those calm, dark eyes. Richard felt something stir inside him. Irritation, maybe? Or perhaps it was the way she refused to look impressed by his expensive suit and confident manner. "Tell you what," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Play something for me. Something really good. If you can actually move me with your music, I'll adopt you. Change your whole life. Get you out of this situation." Tom burst out laughing. "You're kidding, right?" "I'm completely serious," Richard said, though his smirk suggested otherwise. "One performance. If this little street musician can actually touch my heart, I'll take her home, give her everything she needs." "What do you say?" He expected her to get excited or nervous, maybe even refuse. Instead, the girl just studied his face for a long moment. "You mean it?" she asked simply. "I'm a man of my word," Richard said, though inside he knew this was just a game. A way to prove a point to his partners about how these street performers couldn't really deliver anything special. A few people had stopped to watch now. A waitress from the diner stood in the doorway. An old couple paused on their way to their car. The girl stood up slowly. She was shorter than he'd thought, the violin almost too big for her small frame. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll play for you." Richard crossed his arms, that confident smirk still on his face. This would take maybe 5 minutes, and then they could get back on the road. He'd toss some money in her case and they'd leave. The girl moved away from the building wall, finding a spot where she had more space. She checked her violin carefully, adjusting the strings with small, practiced movements. Her hands were steady. Richard glanced at his watch. He had a meeting in 2 hours and still needed that coffee. The girl closed her eyes for a moment, taking a slow breath. When she opened them, something had changed in her expression. The wariness was gone, replaced by something deeper, something focused. She lifted the violin to her shoulder and positioned the bow. Richard shifted his weight, already planning what sarcastic comment he'd make when this was over. Tom pulled out his phone, probably to check messages while they waited through this little performance. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, like someone whispering a secret. But there was something in those quiet sounds that made Richard's smirk fade just a little. The melody began to build, still gentle but gaining something. Emotion, maybe, or memory. Richard found himself actually listening instead of just waiting for it to end. Around them, the few people who had been watching grew still and quiet. Even Tom put his phone away. The girl played with her eyes closed now, her small body swaying slightly with the music. The bow moved across the strings like it was part of her, like breathing, and Richard felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Something uncomfortable and unfamiliar that started in his chest and worked its way up to his throat. The music continued, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Inside the diner, someone had turned down the radio to listen. For the first time in 20 years, Richard felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. He didn't understand why. He didn't understand what this small girl with her scratched violin was doing to him. But as the music filled the air around them, he knew one thing for certain. He had made a promise as a joke, as a cruel game to prove his point. And somehow, without meaning to, he might have just made the biggest promise of his life. The girl's name was Lily. She hadn't always played violin on street corners. Just 8 months ago, her life had been completely different. Back then, she lived in a small but cozy apartment with her mother, Grace. The apartment wasn't fancy, but it was filled with music and laughter. Grace worked as a music teacher at the local elementary school, spending her days helping children discover the joy of playing instruments. Every evening, after dinner, Grace would sit with Lily and teach her violin. They'd practice together, the mother playing piano while the daughter learned to draw her bow across the strings. Grace had started teaching Lily when she was only 5 years old, saying music would be her gift to her daughter. Music tells stories that words can't, Grace used to say. When you play, you're sharing your heart with the world. Lily loved those evenings. The way her mother's face would light up when Lily hit the right notes. The gentle corrections when she made mistakes. The proud smile when she mastered a difficult piece. They didn't have much money. Grace's teaching salary was modest, and Lily's father had left when she was just a baby. But they had each other and they had music. That was enough. Grace was working on teaching Lily a special composition. It was a piece Grace had started writing herself, something original and beautiful. She called it Tomorrow's Hope. It was still incomplete with parts that needed finishing, but Grace promised they'd work on it together. Then came that rainy Tuesday evening in February. Grace was driving home from a parent-teacher conference at school. The roads were slick. A truck driver, tired from a long shift, ran a red light. The police came to the neighbor's door first. Mrs. Chen, who often watched Lily after school, held the crying girl close as the officers explained what had happened. Grace died on the way to the hospital. She was only 34 years old. The days after the funeral were a blur. Lily had no other family. Grace had been an only child, and her parents had passed away years before. There was no father to call, no grandparents to take her in. Social services arrived with kind smiles and gentle voices, but their message was clear. Lily would go into foster care. The first home wasn't terrible, a couple with 3 other foster children, but it was crowded and chaotic. Lily spent most of her time trying to be invisible, clutching her mother's violin like a lifeline. The second home was worse. Too many rules, too much yelling, not enough food. The foster mother complained about the violin, saying the noise gave her headaches. By the third placement, Lily had learned to keep quiet and stay out of the way. She was just one of 5 kids in a house that felt more like a storage facility than a home. The foster parents weren't cruel, just overwhelmed and indifferent. The violin was all she had left of her mother. Every scratch on its surface reminded her of the hours they'd spent together. Sometimes late at night she'd hold it and remember her mother's hands guiding hers, showing her where to place her fingers. School became harder. She couldn't concentrate. Her grades dropped. The other kids avoided her because she was quiet and sad. Teachers were sympathetic but busy with 30 other students. One day, about a month ago, Lily skipped school. She took her violin and rode the bus to the downtown area, walking until she found herself near some shops and restaurants. She sat down and started playing. Not for money at first, just because she needed to feel close to her mother again. A few people stopped and listened. Someone dropped coins in the violin case, then someone else. By the end of the day, she had $12. It wasn't about the money, though. It was about the music. When she played, she could remember her mother's voice, her smile, the way she smelled like vanilla and sheet music. For those moments, the grief didn't hurt quite so much. She started going back to that spot every few days after school. The foster parents never asked where she went. As long as she came home for dinner, they didn't seem to care. Playing on the street became her therapy. Every song was a conversation with her mother. Every note was a memory. She worked on finishing Tomorrow's Hope, the piece her mother had started. It was hard trying to imagine what her mother would have wanted, but slowly it was coming together. That's what she was doing when Richard found her that afternoon. Playing her mother's unfinished song, trying to keep that connection alive. Richard, on the other hand, had his own ghosts. He grew up as Robert Richard Thompson III, the only child of wealthy parents who believed showing emotion was weakness. His father was a real estate developer who built an empire through ruthless business deals. His mother was a socialite more concerned with charity galas than her own son. The only warmth in young Richard's childhood came from his grandmother. She lived with them in their mansion and played piano beautifully. When Richard was 7, she started teaching him. Those piano lessons were the only time he remembered feeling truly happy as a child. But when Richard was 11, his grandmother had a stroke and died within days. His father immediately had the piano removed from the house, saying it was time for Richard to focus on serious things like business and money. Richard learned to bury his feelings. He studied hard, went to the best schools, and entered his father's company. He became exactly what his father wanted, cold, efficient, and rich. He married young to a woman his parents approved of. The marriage was loveless and lasted only 4 years. No children. After the divorce, Richard threw himself even deeper into work. Now at 47, Richard had everything money could buy. Multiple properties, expensive cars, investments worth millions. But he lived alone in a penthouse apartment that felt more like a hotel than a home. He worked 16-hour days, closed deals worth fortunes, and felt absolutely nothing. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried. Couldn't remember the last time anything had moved him. Music, art, beauty, they were just background noise to him now, until a small girl with a battered violin played a song that somehow reached through all those walls he'd built. Until something in her music reminded him of his grandmother's gentle hands on piano keys, of a time when he was still capable of feeling something real. As Lily continued playing that afternoon in the diner parking lot, both of their lives were about to change in ways neither could imagine. The past had brought them both to this moment, but what came next would determine their future. The afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent, casting golden light across the parking lot. Lily stood there, her small figure somehow seeming taller as she held the violin against her shoulder. She took one more deep breath, her eyes closing for just a moment. Richard watched with his arms still crossed, that knowing smirk playing at his lips. He'd heard hundreds of violinists before, street performers, orchestra musicians, even famous soloists at charity events he'd been forced to attend. Music was just organized noise to him now, pleasant background sound at best. Tom leaned against the Mercedes, phone in hand but watching with mild curiosity. The third business partner, James, had walked over to the diner entrance to wait, clearly considering this whole thing a waste of time. But the small crowd that had gathered seemed genuinely interested. The waitress from inside stood in the doorway, dish towel still in her hands. An elderly couple who had been heading to their car had stopped midway across the lot. 2 truck drivers taking a smoke break near their rigs had paused to watch. Lily opened her eyes. For a brief second, she looked directly at Richard, and he saw something there that made him slightly uncomfortable. Not fear or nervousness, something like pity maybe, or understanding, as if she could see right through his expensive suit and confident posture to something hollow underneath. Then she turned her attention fully to the violin. Her left hand moved to position on the neck of the instrument, fingers hovering over the strings. Her right hand held the bow loosely, naturally, like it was an extension of her arm. She began. The first note was barely a whisper. A single, sustained sound that hung in the air like a question, so soft that Richard almost didn't hear it over the distant traffic noise from the highway. Then another note, just as gentle. And another. The melody started to form, slow and careful, like someone walking through a dark room, feeling their way forward. The notes were simple at first, almost childlike in their innocence. Richard shifted his weight, preparing his bored expression. This was fine, he supposed. Pleasant enough, but nothing special. Then something changed. The melody began to grow, not louder but deeper. The simple notes started connecting in unexpected ways, building on each other, creating something richer than he'd anticipated. Lily's bow moved faster now, her fingers dancing across the strings with a confidence that seemed impossible for someone so young. Her eyes were closed again, her face completely absorbed in the music. The song told a story. Richard could feel it even if he couldn't explain it. The gentle beginning gave way to something brighter, happier. He could almost see sunshine in those notes, hear laughter, feel warmth. Despite himself, Richard's arms uncrossed. He stood straighter, actually paying attention now instead of just waiting. The waitress in the doorway had stopped pretending to wipe dishes. She just stood there, listening. One of the truck drivers had walked closer, his cigarette forgotten in his hand. Lily's playing grew more complex. The melody wove and danced, sometimes playful, sometimes wistful. Her small body swayed with the music, the too big jacket moving with her movements. Then the tone shifted, subtly at first. The bright, happy notes began to carry shadows. Minor keys crept in. The melody that had been so full of light started to show cracks. Richard felt something tighten in his chest. The music was becoming sad. Not just sad, heartbroken. The tempo slowed. Each note seemed to carry weight now, like tears made of sound. Lily's bow moved with such emotion that Richard could see her whole body pouring feeling into every stroke. This wasn't just music. This was grief. This was loss. This was a child crying out through the only language that could truly express what she felt. Tom had completely forgotten about his phone. He stood motionless, staring at the small girl with something like shock on his face. The elderly woman in the parking lot had tears running down her cheeks. Her husband held her hand tightly, his own eyes wet. Richard felt his throat constrict. That tightness in his chest was growing, spreading upward. His eyes started to sting. No, he thought. No, this is ridiculous. It's just music. Just a street performer. This means nothing, but his body betrayed him. The music was reaching something inside him that he'd locked away decades ago, something he'd thought was dead and buried. Lily's playing intensified. The grief in the music was raw now, unfiltered. It was the sound of someone who had lost everything. The sound of a child calling for a parent who would never answer. Richard's vision blurred. He blinked hard, but wetness was already forming in his eyes. The melody climbed higher, becoming almost desperate. A plea, a prayer, a scream of loneliness that couldn't be put into words. Only music could carry this kind of pain. Then gradually something else began to emerge from the grief. The desperate notes started to soften. Not healing exactly. More like acceptance. Like someone learning to carry an impossible weight. The music began to blend hope with sorrow. Beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. It acknowledged the pain but refused to let it be the end of the story. Richard couldn't hold it back anymore. Tears rolled down his cheeks. His hands, usually so steady in boardroom negotiations, trembled at his sides. When was the last time he'd cried? His grandmother's funeral 36 years ago? No, he hadn't even cried then. His father had told him that men don't cry, and he'd swallowed every tear. But now, standing in a dusty parking lot in front of business partners and strangers, Richard wept. Not quiet, dignified tears. Real, gut-deep crying that shook his shoulders. Tom looked away, embarrassed for his boss. James, near the diner door, stood frozen with his mouth slightly open in disbelief. But the others in the small crowd weren't judging. Many of them were crying too. The elderly woman sobbed openly against her husband's shoulder. The waitress had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Even one of the tough-looking truck drivers was wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Lily played on, unaware or uncaring of the effect she was having. Her eyes remained closed, her face peaceful despite the intense emotion pouring from her violin. The song began to reach its conclusion. The notes climbed one final time, reaching towards something beyond grief. Toward light, maybe. Or tomorrow. The piece her mother had called Tomorrow's Hope was finally complete. The last note hung in the air, sustained and pure. Then slowly, Lily let it fade until there was only silence. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The spell of the music still hung over them all. Then Lily lowered her violin and opened her eyes. She looked directly at Richard, at this grown man in his expensive suit crying like a child, and she understood. The silence broke as someone began to clap. Then another person joined. Soon the entire small crowd was applauding, some people even cheering. Richard couldn't move. He stood there with tears still wet on his face, his expensive watch catching the late afternoon sun, his whole body shaking with emotions he'd forgotten existed. Tom approached slowly, unsure how to handle this situation. He'd never seen his boss show any real emotion, let alone break down completely. But Richard wasn't thinking about his image or his reputation. He was remembering his grandmother's hands on piano keys. He was remembering what it felt like to be human, to be vulnerable, to be alive instead of just existing. Lily waited patiently, holding her violin at her side. She'd done what he asked. She'd played something that moved him. Now it was his turn to decide what came next. The applause slowly died down, but Richard still stood frozen. His chest heaved with each breath, like he'd just run a marathon. The tears continued to fall, and for the first time in his adult life, he didn't care who saw. Tom finally reached his side, touching his elbow gently. "Boss, are you okay?" Richard couldn't answer. Words felt impossible. His throat was too tight, his mind too full of emotions he couldn't name. Lily placed her violin carefully back in its case. She moved slowly, giving him time. When she was done, she looked up at him and waited. The crowd began to disperse, sensing that something private was happening. The elderly couple walked away, the woman still dabbing at her eyes. The truck drivers returned to their rigs. The waitress went back inside, though she kept glancing through the window. Richard wiped his face with his hand, then pulled out a handkerchief from his suit pocket. His hands shook as he dried his eyes. James and Tom exchanged worried looks but said nothing. Finally, Richard took a shaky breath and walked toward Lily. Each step felt heavy, like his legs didn't quite work right. When he reached her, he did something he'd never done before in his entire business career. He got down on one knee. Now they were eye to eye. Richard could see the details he'd missed before. The dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. The way her jacket was torn at the shoulder. The sad wisdom in her young face that no child should have. He started, then had to stop and clear his throat. "I made that offer as a joke, as a cruel game." Lily nodded slightly, like she'd already known that. "I wanted to prove to my partners that street performers were all the same, that nobody could really touch me, that I was above all that." His voice cracked. "I wanted to mock you." "I know," Lily said quietly. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, shame washing over him like ice water. "How did you know?" "Your eyes," she said simply. "They looked empty, like my foster dad's when he drinks." The comparison should have insulted him, but it didn't. It was too accurate. "What you just played," Richard struggled to find the right words. "That wasn't just music. That was your life, wasn't it?" Lily looked down at her worn shoes. "It was my mom's song. She started teaching it to me before she died. I finished it myself." Something inside Richard's chest cracked open even wider. "Your mother. Car accident. 8 months ago." Lily's voice was matter-of-fact, but Richard could hear the ocean of grief underneath those simple words. He thought of his grandmother, the only person who'd ever really loved him. Gone 36 years now, but the loss suddenly felt fresh again, like it had just happened. "My grandmother played piano," Richard heard himself say. "She was the only one who cared about me. When she died, I was 11. My father threw out her piano the same week." Lily's eyes met his, and in that moment they understood each other completely. Two people separated by decades and circumstances, but connected by the same kind of loss. The kind that leaves a hole nothing can fill. "I haven't felt anything in years," Richard continued, the words pouring out now like water from a broken dam. "I built my whole life around not feeling, around being cold and efficient and above it all. And then you played that song and I remembered what it was like to be human." Tom and James stood by the car, clearly uncomfortable with this display of emotion from a man they'd only ever known as calculating and controlled. "I meant the offer as a joke," Richard repeated, "but if you'll have me, I want to honor it. Not because I have to, not for show, but because something in your music woke me up from a very long sleep." Lily studied his face carefully. Richard could see her weighing his words, judging his sincerity. She'd learned not to trust easily. The world had taught her that lesson early. "Why would you want to adopt me?" she asked. "You don't know me. I'm just some kid you saw on the street." "Because," Richard said, and he realized he was being more honest than he'd been in decades, "I think maybe we can save each other. You showed me I still have a heart. Maybe I can give you a safe place to keep your mother's memory alive." Lily's lower lip trembled slightly. "You promise you won't throw away my violin?" Like your dad did with the piano? The question hit Richard like a physical blow. The parallel was so clear, so obvious. History trying to repeat itself. But he could choose differently than his father had. I promise, he said, and he meant it with everything in him. I promise your mother's violin will be treasured. I promise music will always have a place in our home. I promise I'll never make you bury the things that matter. A single tear rolled down Lily's cheek. Our home? If you'll let me try, Richard said. I don't know how to be a father. I'll probably mess up a lot, but I promise I'll try. Really try. Behind them, Tom muttered something to James. Richard caught the words, lost his mind, and what the hell? He didn't care. For once in his life, he wasn't thinking about what his business partners thought, or what made financial sense, or what protected his reputation. Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, Do you promise to learn why music matters? Yes, Richard said immediately. And you won't just give me things and ignore me? Like you're too busy? Richard thought of his empty penthouse, his 16-hour workdays, his life that consisted of nothing but deals and money and meaningless accomplishments. I promise to actually be there, he said, to be present, to be a real person, not just a wallet. Lily reached down and picked up her violin case. She held it against her chest like a shield. Okay, she said quietly. But if you're lying, I'll know. And I'll run away. Fair enough, Richard said. He stood up, his knees protesting slightly. I have to do this properly, legally. There will be paperwork and interviews and home studies. It might take time. I'm used to waiting, Lily said. Richard pulled out his phone, his hand steadier now. I'm going to call my lawyer right now. Get the process started. Can I have the address of your foster home? Lily recited an address on the other side of town. Richard typed it into his phone, then looked at her again. I'm going to visit you, he said, regularly. So you know I'm serious, so you can get to know me. Is that okay? Lily nodded. Can you bring music sheets? I want to learn new songs. Richard felt something warm spread through his chest, not the cold efficiency he was used to. Something softer, something that felt suspiciously like hope. I'll bring whatever you need, he promised. He reached into his wallet and pulled out several $100 bills. For now, please take this. For food or whatever you need. Lily looked at the money but didn't take it. That's too much. It's not enough, Richard said. Please. Until I can do this properly. She hesitated, then took the bills and tucked them carefully into her violin case. Thank you. No, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion again. Thank you. You have no idea what you just did for me. Tom approached again, this time more carefully. Boss, we really need to get going. The meeting. Richard turned to him, and Tom actually took a step back at the look on his face. Cancel it, Richard said. What? Cancel the meeting. Cancel everything for the rest of the week. I have more important things to do. James walked over, looking concerned. Richard, this is the Henderson deal. It's worth $40 million. I don't care, Richard said, and he realized he really didn't. For the first time in his career, money wasn't the most important thing. Some things matter more. He turned back to Lily. I'm going to make some calls. Get this started. Can I drive you back to your foster home? Lily shook her head. The bus is fine. I know the route. At least let me drive you to the bus stop, Richard insisted. Okay. They walked to the Mercedes together, this unlikely pair, a millionaire in a suit and a small girl with a battered violin. Tom and James followed, both looking like they'd entered an alternate universe. As Richard opened the car door for Lily, he caught his reflection in the window. His eyes were still red from crying. His face was blotchy. His hair was messed up from running his hands through it. But for the first time in decades, he looked alive. He looked real. He looked human. And that, he realized, was worth more than all the business deals in the world. 3 days after their encounter at the diner, Richard sat in his lawyer's office. The room was all dark wood and leather chairs, designed to impress and intimidate. But today, Richard barely noticed the expensive surroundings. David Chen, his attorney for the past 15 years, sat across from him with a thick folder of papers. David had handled Richard's divorce, countless business deals, and even helped him sue a competitor once. But he'd never seen Richard like this. So let me make sure I understand, David said slowly. You want to adopt a child you met 3 days ago? Yes, Richard said firmly. A foster child who was playing violin on the street. Yes. David leaned back in his chair. Richard, I've known you a long time. You've never even mentioned wanting children. What's really going on here? Richard met his gaze steadily. I made a promise. And for once in my life, I'm going to keep a promise that actually matters. Adoption isn't simple, David warned, especially for a single man. There will be background checks, home studies, psychological evaluations. They'll look at every aspect of your life. Your work schedule alone will be a red flag. You work 80 hours a week. Then I'll work less, Richard said. David blinked. I'm sorry, what? You heard me. I'll work less. I'll make time. Whatever it takes. David set down his pen and studied Richard carefully. Did you have some kind of breakdown? Should I be worried about you? Richard almost smiled. Maybe I did have a breakdown. Or maybe I finally woke up. Does it matter? It matters if you're making life-changing decisions while not in your right mind, David said carefully. I'm more in my right mind than I've been in 30 years, Richard replied. David, I need you to help me do this properly, legally, can you? David sighed and opened the folder. I can, but I want you to understand what you're getting into. The foster care system is complicated. If Lily has any biological family who might contest this, it could get messy. And even if everything goes smoothly, the process takes months, sometimes longer. I understand. You'll need to take parenting classes. Your home will need to be inspected and approved. Social workers will interview you multiple times. They'll want to know your motivations, your plans, your ability to provide emotional support, not just financial support. I'm ready, Richard said. David looked skeptical, but started making notes. All right. First thing, I'll contact Child Protective Services and start the paperwork. But Richard, while this process is happening, you need to be careful. You can't just show up at her foster home whenever you want. There are rules. What kind of rules? You'll need to schedule visits through the proper channels. They'll want to supervise at first, and you absolutely cannot give her any more large amounts of cash. It looks bad, like you're trying to buy her affection. Richard felt his face flush. He'd already brought Lily $200 when he visited her yesterday. What should I bring instead? Appropriate gifts. Books, art supplies, music sheets like she asked for. Things that show you're interested in her well-being, not trying to impress her with money. David paused. Actually, the music sheets are good. Shows you listened to what she wanted. Over the next few weeks, Richard's life changed in ways he never expected. David filed the initial paperwork and scheduled the first meeting with a social worker named Patricia Collins. Patricia was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She came to Richard's penthouse apartment with a clipboard and a lot of questions. This is a beautiful home, she said, looking around at the sleek, modern space. But it doesn't look like anyone actually lives here. Richard glanced around, seeing his home through her eyes. She was right. It looked like a hotel suite. All clean lines and expensive furniture, but nothing personal. No photos, no mess, no life. I work a lot, he admitted. So I've read in your file, Patricia said. You typically work 80 to 90 hours per week? I did. I've cut back to 50. Patricia raised an eyebrow. In 3 weeks, you've cut your work schedule nearly in half. Yes, I realized my priorities were wrong. She made notes on her clipboard. And what makes you think you're ready to be a parent? You've never raised children. You've been divorced with no kids from that marriage. You live alone and by your own admission have dedicated your entire adult life to your career. Richard took a deep breath. You're right. I'm not ready. I don't know what I'm doing. But I'm willing to learn, and I think Lily needs someone who will actually try, not just another foster placement where she's just a number. Many foster parents care deeply about the children in their homes, Patricia said sharply. I'm sure they do, Richard said quickly. I didn't mean to insult them, but I've visited Lily 4 times now. I've seen where she's staying. 5 kids in a 3-bedroom house. The foster parents are overwhelmed. Lily told me she gets dinner and a place to sleep, but that's about it. Patricia's expression softened slightly. Unfortunately, that's common. There aren't enough quality foster homes, but that doesn't mean you're automatically the solution. I know, Richard said. That's why I'm asking you to evaluate me honestly. If I'm not suitable, tell me, but at least give me a chance to prove I'm serious. Patricia spent the next 2 hours going through every aspect of Richard's life. His childhood, his relationship history, his work, his finances, his health, his motivations. When she finally left, Richard felt exhausted. But he also felt something else. determined. His visits with Lily continued, now properly scheduled through Child Protective Services. At first, they met in a supervised room at the social services office. A worker sat in the corner while Richard and Lily talked awkwardly. He brought her the music sheets she'd requested. Classical pieces, some modern songs, even some blank sheet music so she could write her own compositions. "You remembered," Lily said softly, looking through the papers. "Of course I did," Richard said. "I told you I would." During their third supervised visit, Richard had an idea. "Would you be willing to teach me about music?" "Like really teach me?" Lily looked up surprised. "You want to learn?" "I promised I would learn why music matters," Richard said. And I meant it. So Lily began explaining music theory to him. Scales and notes and rhythm and tempo. She used simple words the way her mother had taught her. Richard listened intently, asking questions, taking notes on his phone. The social worker in the corner watched this interaction with interest. This wasn't typical behavior for someone trying to adopt. Most people brought toys or games trying to win the child over. But Richard was letting Lily teach him, giving her power and respect. After a month of supervised visits, Patricia approved unsupervised time. Richard could now take Lily out for a few hours at a time. Their first outing was to a music store. Richard watched as Lily's eyes went wide at all the instruments and supplies. She gravitated toward the violins, looking at them with longing. "Would you like a new one?" Richard asked gently. Lily's hand went protectively to her bag where she kept her mother's violin. "I like mine. I meant in addition to," Richard clarified. "Your mother's violin is special, but maybe having a backup would be good." Lily considered this. "Maybe, but not today. Today I just want to look," so they looked. At violins and sheet music and even a beautiful cello that caught Lily's attention. Richard didn't push. He just followed her around the store, listening as she explained different instruments. The store owner, an elderly man who'd run the place for 40 years, came over to chat. When Lily mentioned her mother had been a music teacher, his face lit up. "Grace?" he asked. "Grace was your mother?" Lily nodded, eyes going wide. "She used to come in here all the time," the man said warmly. "Bought music sheets, had her violin repaired here. She was a lovely woman. I was so sorry to hear about the accident." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "She talked about you, Mr. Patterson, right?" "She said you always gave her a discount on sheet music." "She was a good customer and a good person," Mr. Patterson said. Then he looked at Richard. "You her father?" "Working on it," Richard said simply. Mr. Patterson nodded approvingly. Then he walked to a shelf and pulled out a folder. "Your mother special ordered this before she passed. It's a collection of advanced violin pieces. She'd already paid for it. I've been holding on to it, hoping you'd come in someday." He handed the folder to Lily. She opened it with shaking hands, and Richard could see tears streaming down her face now. "She was going to surprise me with this," Lily whispered. "For my 10th birthday." Richard felt his own throat tighten. He put a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder, and for the first time she leaned into him. Mr. Patterson wiped his own eyes. "She'd be happy you're still playing. She'd be happy you're being looked after." As they left the store, Lily clutching the folder like treasure, she looked up at Richard. "Thank you for bringing me here." "Thank you for letting me be part of this," Richard said. Over the next few weeks, their relationship deepened. Richard learned about Lily's favorite foods, her fear of thunderstorms, her love of hot chocolate. Lily learned that Richard could barely cook, that he'd never seen half the popular kids' movies, that he was terrible at video games but willing to try. One evening, during a visit at his penthouse, Richard sat at his laptop working while Lily practiced her violin. He'd set up a corner of his living room just for her, with a music stand and good lighting. 2 months into the adoption process, Patricia made an unexpected visit to Richard's office. He'd been in a meeting with department heads discussing a major development project when his assistant interrupted to say it was urgent. Richard excused himself and met Patricia in a conference room. The look on her face told him something was wrong. "We have a problem," she said, sitting down heavily. "Lily's biological father has been located." Richard felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "I thought there was no family." "So did we," Patricia said. "But he's come forward now. His name is Derek Williams. He abandoned Lily and her mother when Lily was 6 months old. Never paid child support, never made contact. But legally he still has parental rights. And he wants her now?" Richard could hear the anger in his own voice. He's filed paperwork to regain custody, Patricia confirmed. Claims he's gotten his life together and wants a relationship with his daughter. Let me guess, Richard said bitterly. He found out about me and suddenly decided being a father sounds good. Patricia didn't disagree. The timing is suspicious. Someone must have told him about your interest in adopting Lily, about your financial status. Richard stood up and paced the room. So what happens now? There will be a custody hearing. The judge will determine whether Derek's parental rights should be terminated, allowing you to proceed with adoption, or whether he should be given a chance to parent Lily. Does Lily know? Not yet. I wanted to tell you first. I'll need to inform her today. Richard ran his hands through his hair. This is going to devastate her. She's finally starting to feel safe. I know, Patricia said quietly, but it's the law. Biological parents have rights even when they don't deserve them. That evening, Richard went to see Lily at her foster home. When she came to the door, he could tell Patricia had already talked to her. Her eyes were red and swollen. They sat on the front porch steps together. The foster parents, to their credit, gave them privacy. He's not my dad, Lily said, her voice fierce despite the tears. He left us. He never called, never sent birthday cards, nothing. My mom raised me alone. I know, Richard said softly. And now he shows up because you have money? Lily's small hands clenched into fists. He doesn't care about me. He just wants your money. We don't know that for certain, Richard said, though he believed exactly what Lily was saying. I know it, Lily said, and if the judge makes me go with him, I'll run away. I swear I will. Richard put his arm around her shoulders. Don't say that. Running away is dangerous. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out. You can't promise that, Lily said, leaning against him. Grown-ups always say things will be okay, but they can't control it. She was right, and Richard hated it. For all his money and power, he couldn't control this. The law would decide. A judge who didn't know Lily, who didn't know Derek, who would just look at paperwork and make a decision that would change a little girl's life. The next few weeks were tense. Richard hired a family law specialist, a sharp woman named Jennifer Park who had a reputation for fighting hard for her clients. I'll be honest with you, Jennifer said during their first meeting. This is going to be difficult. Biological parents have significant rights. Unless we can prove Derek is unfit, the court will likely favor giving him a chance. He abandoned his daughter, Richard said. 9 years ago, Jennifer countered. People change, or at least they claim they do. We'll need to investigate Derek's current situation, his employment, housing, any criminal record, substance abuse issues, anything that would make him an unsuitable parent. Richard hired a private investigator. What they found wasn't promising. Derek had a steady job as a mechanic, his own apartment. No recent arrests. He'd completed an addiction treatment program 3 years ago and appeared to be clean. On paper, Derek looked like someone who had turned his life around. But where was he for 9 years? Richard demanded. Where was he when Lily needed a father? Where was he when her mother died? Those are good questions, Jennifer agreed. And we'll ask them. But the court's primary concern is whether he can be a suitable parent now, not whether he was in the past. The custody hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. During that time, Derek was granted supervised visits with Lily. She had no choice but to comply. Richard wasn't allowed to be present, but Lily told him about the visits afterward. They were held in the same room where Richard and Lily had first met under supervision. He kept calling me sweetie and honey, Lily reported, her face twisted with discomfort. Like we're close. Like he knows me. What did you talk about? Richard asked. He asked about school and stuff. But it was fake, you know? Like he was acting for the social worker. Lily picked at a thread on her jacket. He kept talking about all the things we could do together if I came to live with him. Said he'd take me to amusement parks and buy me nice things. Richard's jaw tightened. What did you say? Nothing much. The social worker said I should give him a chance, but I don't want to. Lily looked up at Richard with frightened eyes. What if the judge makes me go with him? Then we'll appeal, Richard said. We'll keep fighting. But privately, he was worried. Jennifer had warned him that unless something significant came up, the court might rule in Derek's favor. Biological connection carried weight. Richard's work suffered during this time. He'd cut his hours dramatically, but now even the time he spent at the office was distracted. His business partners noticed. Tom pulled him aside one day. Look, I know you care about this kid, but you're tanking deals left and right. The board is starting to ask questions. Let them ask, Richard said. Richard, be realistic. If you lose custody and you've destroyed your career in the process, what will you have left? Richard looked at his longtime associate with new eyes. When did we become the kind of people who think career is all that matters? Tom blinked. That's always been what matters. No, Richard said slowly. That's what I told myself mattered because I was too afraid to care about anything real. I was wrong. The preliminary hearing arrived. Richard sat in the courtroom next to Jennifer, watching as Derek took the stand. He was 37, clean cut for the occasion, wearing his best clothes. Derek's lawyer asked him questions designed to paint him in the best light. Yes, he'd made mistakes. Yes, he'd struggled with addiction, but he'd gotten clean, kept steady employment, and now wanted a relationship with his daughter. I was young and stupid, Derek said, and Richard heard practiced remorse in his voice. I ran away from responsibility, but I've grown up now. I want to be the father I should have been. Jennifer cross-examined him, and she was merciless. You've been clean for 3 years, you say? Yes, ma'am. And in those 3 years, did you ever try to contact your daughter? Derek hesitated. I was working on getting my life together first. For 3 years? You couldn't make a single phone call? Send a single letter? I wanted to be stable first. Or did you only reach out when you learned a wealthy man wanted to adopt her? Jennifer's voice was sharp. Derek's lawyer objected. The judge sustained it. But the point had been made. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Harrison, called Lily to her chambers. Private conversation, no lawyers present. Just the judge and the child. Richard waited in the hallway pacing. 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. When Lily emerged, her face was streaked with tears but set with determination. She walked past Derek without looking at him and came straight to Richard. The judge wanted to know what I wanted, Lily said quietly. I told her. The judge didn't rule that day. She said she needed time to consider everything. 2 weeks later, they were all back in court for the ruling. Richard's hands were sweating. Lily sat next to him, gripping his hand so tightly it hurt. Judge Harrison looked at everyone assembled in her courtroom. Then she began to speak. This court has reviewed all evidence and testimony. I've considered the biological father's rights and his apparent rehabilitation. I've also considered the child's wishes and her best interests. Richard held his breath. While biological relationships are important, Judge Harrison continued, they are not the only factor in determining custody. A parent's rights come with responsibilities. Derek Williams abandoned those responsibilities for nearly a decade. Derek's face fell. Furthermore, in my private conversation with Lily, she expressed clear and articulate reasons for her preferences. She doesn't know her biological father. He's a stranger to her. Meanwhile, she's developed a meaningful relationship with the prospective adoptive parent. Richard felt Lily's grip on his hand tighten even more. However, and the judge's voice took on a warning tone, I'm not making a final ruling today. I'm giving both parties 3 months. Derek Williams will continue supervised visits. Richard Thompson will continue his adoption process. At the end of 3 months, I'll make a final determination. It wasn't the answer anyone wanted. Derek looked frustrated. Richard felt exhausted. But Lily whispered, it's okay. She's giving you more time to prove you're serious. And suddenly Richard understood. Judge Harrison was testing him. 3 more months of uncertainty, of stress, of difficulty. Would he stick around? Or would he decide this was too much trouble? As they left the courthouse, Richard knelt down to Lily's level. I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly. 3 months, 3 years, 30 years. I'm here. Lily hugged him tight. The 3 months that followed were the hardest of Richard's life. Harder than building his business empire. Harder than his divorce. Harder than anything he'd faced because this time, it wasn't just about him. Derek's supervised visits with Lily continued twice a week. Each visit left her more withdrawn and upset. Derek was playing a part, showing up with gifts and big promises, but Lily could see through it. She'd tell Richard afterward how fake it all felt. Today he brought me a stuffed animal, Lily said one evening, her voice flat. I'm almost 10 years old. I don't play with stuffed animals. But he doesn't know that because he doesn't know me. Richard listened, letting her vent. He was learning that sometimes the best thing he could do was just be there and listen. But Derek wasn't the only challenge. Word had spread through Richard's business circles about the adoption. Some people were supportive, many were not. At a board meeting, one of the directors spoke up. "With all due respect, Richard, your performance has been declining. You're distracted. Maybe this adoption isn't the right time in your life for this kind of commitment. Or maybe," Richard replied calmly, "my priorities have shifted. This company will survive with me working 50 hours instead of 90. Lily won't survive another failed relationship with an adult who promised to care for her." The board member didn't look convinced. After the meeting, Richard overheard whispers. Some board members were discussing whether he should step down as CEO. Richard went home that night to his now different apartment. He'd changed a lot in the past months. The sterile, hotel-like space now had evidence of life. Photos on the wall, including several of Lily playing violin. A corner set up with her music stand and supplies. Books on parenting scattered on his coffee table. He picked up one of the books, The Connected Parent, and flipped through pages he'd highlighted. Sections about building trust with traumatized children, chapters about helping kids process grief. He was trying so hard to learn, to be what Lily needed, but doubt crept in late at night. What if the board was right? What if he wasn't capable of this? What if he was being selfish, inserting himself into this girl's life when a real parent, biological parent, wanted her back? The next morning, Richard called Patricia. "I need to ask you something honestly. Am I doing the right thing? Fighting Derek for custody?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. "That's not a question I can answer for you, Richard. But you've seen both of us with Lily. You know Derek's history. You know mine. What's your honest opinion?" "Off the record?" Patricia said. "I've been a social worker for 23 years. I've seen hundreds of cases. Derek looks good on paper now, but I've seen his type before. He's playing the game, saying what the court wants to hear. But I haven't seen real emotional connection with Lily. No genuine relationship building. And me? You're fumbling around like most first-time parents do," Patricia said. "But you're trying. Really trying. You listen to her. You've completely reorganized your life for her. You're learning about her world instead of trying to force her into yours." Richard felt some of the weight lift from his chest. "Thank you for being honest. Don't thank me yet," Patricia warned. "The judge will make the final call. And biological parents have strong rights even when they probably shouldn't." A week later, Derek's lawyer filed a new motion. They wanted more visitation time, unsupervised visits, claiming Derek had proven himself responsible and deserved more access to his daughter. Jennifer fought it hard. "He's known her for 2 months. That's not enough time to establish trust, especially with a child who's been through trauma." But Derek's lawyer argued that Richard had also known Lily for just a few months longer. If Richard could be trusted with unsupervised time, why not Derek? Judge Harrison scheduled a hearing. This time she wanted to hear from Lily directly in open court. The day of the hearing, Lily was terrified. She'd never spoken in court before. Richard wanted to protect her from this, but the law required it. Jennifer had prepared her, explaining what would happen. But when Lily took the stand, she looked so small in the witness chair. Her feet didn't even touch the ground. Derek's lawyer questioned her first. "Lily, your father loves you very much. Don't you want to give him a chance?" "He's not my father," Lily said quietly. "A father doesn't leave when things get hard. He made mistakes, yes, but he's sorry. He wants to make up for lost time." "You can't make up for 9 years," Lily said, her voice stronger now. "You can't make up for not being there when my mom died, when I was alone and scared." Derek's lawyer tried a different approach. "Richard is very busy with his work. Won't you feel lonely if you live with him?" "He makes time for me," Lily said. "He comes to my school concerts even when he has meetings. He helps me with homework even though he says math is hard. He listens when I talk about my mom. But Derek is your real family." "Family isn't just blood," Lily said, and Richard felt his throat tighten. "Family is who shows up, who keeps promises, who makes you feel safe." Jennifer's questioning was gentler. She asked Lily about her relationship with Richard, about how she felt during visits with Derek, about what she wanted for her future. Lily answered honestly. She talked about feeling like Derek was acting, playing a role, about how Richard felt real, even when he made mistakes or didn't know what to do. Judge Harrison listened carefully, taking notes. When Lily was done, the judge dismissed her gently. But as Lily walked past Derek on her way out of the witness stand, he spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. You're being manipulated by his money. You'll regret choosing him over your real father." The courtroom went silent. Judge Harrison's face hardened. "Mr. Williams," she said sharply, "one more outburst like that and you'll be held in contempt." But the damage was done. Derek had shown his true feelings. The mask had slipped. Lily ran to Richard, burying her face in his suit jacket. He held her while she cried. Not caring that the whole courtroom was watching, that moment changed everything. Judge Harrison saw Derek's anger, his sense of entitlement. Saw him blaming a child for not wanting a relationship with a stranger. The judge didn't rule immediately, but her expression told Richard something had shifted. 3 days later, Richard got a call from Jennifer. "Judge Harrison wants to see you in her chambers, alone, tomorrow morning." Richard's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "I honestly don't know," Jennifer said. "But it's unusual. Just be honest with her." The next morning, Richard sat in Judge Harrison's chambers. The judge studied him over her desk. "Tell me why you really want to adopt Lily," she said. No lawyer speak, just a direct question. Richard took a deep breath. "Because that little girl reminded me what it feels like to be human. I'd spent 30 years building walls, refusing to feel anything. And then she played her violin and everything cracked open. She didn't just play music. She played grief and hope and love and loss. And I remembered I had a heart." "That's about you," Judge Harrison observed. "What about her? What can you give her?" "Stability, safety, a place where her mother's memory is honored, not forgotten. A home where music isn't noise but beauty." Richard paused. "And I can give her someone who will show up. Every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." "You've changed your entire life in 4 months," the judge said. "How do I know this isn't temporary? How do I know you won't get tired of parenting and go back to your old ways?" "You don't," Richard admitted. "You can't know for certain. But I can tell you that my old life was empty. It was successful and impressive and completely hollow. This new life, even with all its challenges, has meaning. I'm not going back to empty." Judge Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm going to ask you something I don't usually ask. If I grant Derek full custody, will you stay in Lily's life? As a mentor or something?" Richard felt like he'd been punched. "Is that your ruling?" "Answer the question." Richard thought about it honestly. Could he watch Lily go to Derek and just be a visitor in her life? Could he step back and let her be raised by someone he didn't trust? "I would try," he said finally, "because she needs support no matter what. But it would break both of us. She needs stability, not another loss. And I need to know she's safe and cared for, not just legally placed with a biological parent who sees her as a trophy or a paycheck." The judge nodded slowly. "That's what I thought you'd say. You may go." Richard left confused and worried. He had no idea if that conversation had helped or hurt his case. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Derek made another mistake. He showed up at Lily's foster home unannounced, angry that she'd missed one of their scheduled visits because she was sick with the flu. The foster mother called the police when Derek became aggressive, demanding to see Lily. It went on his record as a violation of the visitation agreement. His lawyer tried to spin it as a concerned father worried about his sick child. But the police report told a different story. A man angry about losing control, making threats. Finally, the day of the final hearing arrived. The courtroom was full. Patricia was there. Jennifer sat next to Richard, her usual confidence tempered with caution. Derek sat across the aisle with his lawyer, looking confident. Lily sat behind Richard, dressed in the nice outfit they'd bought together for her school concert last week. She looked scared but determined. Judge Harrison entered and everyone stood. 6 months after the adoption was finalized, Richard's penthouse apartment looked completely different. Where cold minimalism once reigned, warmth and life now filled every corner. The living room held Lily's music stand, surrounded by organized chaos of sheet music and violin accessories. Photos covered one wall, a timeline of their journey together, the first awkward supervised visit, Lily's first night in her new home, her 10th birthday party where she actually smiled and meant it. But the biggest change was the music room. Richard had converted one of his spare bedrooms into a dedicated space for Lily. Proper acoustics, good lighting, comfortable seating. Her mother's violin had a place of honor on a special stand. Next to it sat the new violin Richard had bought her, not to replace the old one, but to preserve it. And in the corner sat a beautiful, upright piano. the same brand his grandmother had owned, though not the actual piano his father had thrown out. That one was long gone, but this one felt right. Richard had been taking piano lessons for 4 months now. Twice a week, a patient teacher named Mr. Kim came to the apartment and guided Richard through basic pieces. Richard was terrible at first, his fingers stiff and uncertain after 36 years away from piano keys. But he practiced. Every evening after work, for at least 30 minutes, he sat at that piano and worked through simple melodies. Lily would practice her violin nearby, and sometimes they'd play together. Her advanced pieces and his beginner scales shouldn't have worked together, but somehow they did. This particular evening, Lily sat at the kitchen counter doing homework while Richard attempted to cook dinner. He'd learned exactly 3 meals he could make without burning the apartment down. Tonight was spaghetti night. "Dad," Lily said, and Richard still felt his heart warm every time she called him that. "Mrs. Patterson asked if I'd play at the school talent show." "That's wonderful," Richard said, stirring the sauce. "What piece are you thinking?" Lily was quiet for a moment. "I want to play Tomorrow's Hope. The song Mom started and I finished." Richard stopped stirring and turned to look at her. "Are you sure? That's a very personal piece." "That's why I want to play it," Lily said. "Mom always said music is for sharing, and I think other kids who've lost people might understand it." Richard walked over and sat next to her. "Then you should absolutely play it. I'll be in the front row." "Even if you have a meeting?" Lily asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. "Especially if I have a meeting," Richard confirmed. "Nothing is more important than you." They had fallen into comfortable routines. Breakfast together every morning, even if it was just cereal. Richard dropped Lily at school on his way to work. They had dinner together every night, talking about their days. Homework time was sacred, and bedtime was always at 8:30, though Richard had learned to add an extra 30 minutes for the conversations they'd have in the doorway, as he said goodnight. Life wasn't perfect. There were hard days when Lily missed her mother so intensely she couldn't stop crying. Days when Richard had no idea what to do except sit with her and let her grieve. There were disagreements about screen time and vegetables and whether she really needed to practice violin on days she didn't feel like it. But they figured it out together. Richard had learned that being a parent meant not having all the answers. It meant trying, failing, apologizing, and trying again. The biggest surprise was how much Richard himself had changed. His business partners barely recognized him anymore. He left work at 5 most days. He said no to weekend meetings. He turned down a major development deal because it would have required months of travel. Tom had pulled him aside last month, genuinely concerned. "You're walking away from millions. This isn't like you." "The old me," Richard had corrected. "The old me would have taken that deal and missed my daughter's childhood. The new me knows what actually matters." Some board members still grumbled about his reduced hours and changed priorities. But the company was doing fine. Better than fine, actually. Richard's new management style, more collaborative and less ruthless, had improved morale. Employee turnover was down. Productivity was up. It turned out that a CEO who actually cared about work-life balance created a better company culture. Who knew? The talent show was scheduled for a Friday evening in the school auditorium. Richard arrived early, claiming a seat in the front row just as promised. He'd left work at 3 o'clock, ignoring the shocked looks from his assistant. Patricia came too, sitting next to Richard. They'd stayed in touch after the adoption finalized. She'd become something like a family friend, checking in occasionally to see how they were doing. "You clean up nice," Patricia teased, noting his casual sweater instead of his usual suit. "Lily told me not to wear a tie," Richard admitted. "Said it makes me look too serious." "Smart kid," Patricia said. The auditorium filled with parents and families. Richard recognized some of them from school events he'd started attending. Parent-teacher conferences, open houses, the winter concert. He was learning to be part of a community instead of isolated in his tower. The talent show began with the usual mix of performances. A girl sang a pop song. A boy did magic tricks. A group of kids performed a dance routine. The audience clapped politely for each act. Then it was Lily's turn. She walked onto the stage carrying her mother's violin, the one that had been with her through everything. The scratched, worn instrument that held so many memories. Richard's heart swelled with pride and nerves. He pulled out his phone to record, something he'd learned to do at every one of Lily's performances. Lily stood at the center of the stage. The auditorium grew quiet. She looked out at the audience, found Richard's face, and smiled. Then she began to play. Tomorrow's Hope started gently, just like it had that day at the diner, those soft questioning notes that built into something bigger. But Richard heard it differently now. He knew the story behind every phrase. He knew which parts her mother had written and which parts Lily had added. The melody wove through emotions. Joy and sorrow, loss and resilience, grief and hope all tangled together. It was more polished now than when she'd first played it for him, but it had lost none of its raw honesty. Richard watched his daughter play, this brave girl who had survived so much, who had lost her mother but refused to lose her mother's love, who had taken a cruel bet from a cynical man and somehow seen the person he could become instead of the person he was. Around him, parents were crying. Not everyone, but many. The music reached them the same way it had reached Richard that first day. Patricia wiped her eyes. "That girl," she whispered. "She's something special." "I know," Richard said, his own vision blurring with tears. The song built toward its climax, Lily's bow moving with confidence and grace. The uncertain child who used to play on street corners was gone, replaced by someone who owned her gift and understood its power. The final notes came, reaching upward like a prayer or a promise. The melody resolved into something that wasn't quite happiness but was definitely hope. Tomorrow's Hope, just like the title said. Lily held the last note, letting it ring through the auditorium, then gently let it fade. Silence. Complete silence for 3 heartbeats. Then the entire auditorium erupted in applause. People stood clapping and cheering. Parents wiped their eyes. Teachers looked stunned. The other kids in the talent show stared in awe. Lily stood on stage holding her violin, looking overwhelmed by the response. She found Richard's face in the crowd again, and he was standing too, clapping until his hands hurt, crying and not caring who saw. She took a small bow, the way he'd practiced with her, then walked off stage. Richard met her backstage, and she fell into his arms. "Was it okay?" she asked, muffled against his shoulder. "It was perfect," Richard said, holding her tight. "You were perfect. Your mom would be so proud." Lily pulled back to look at him. "You think so?" "I know so," Richard said firmly. "And I'm proud too. So incredibly proud." After the show ended and they'd congratulated the other performers, Richard and Lily walked to the parking lot together. It was a cool spring evening, stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Can we get ice cream?" Lily asked. "To celebrate?" "Absolutely," Richard said. "But just this once because it's a special occasion." "Not every Friday," Lily grinned. "That's what you said last Friday." "That was different. Last Friday was because you aced your math test. And the Friday before that was because I cleaned my room without being asked." Richard laughed, realizing he'd been played. "You're too smart for your own good, you know that?" "I learned from the best," Lily said, taking his hand. They got ice cream at the shop near their apartment building. Chocolate chip for Lily, vanilla for Richard. They sat at a small table, and Lily told him about her friends' performances and how nervous she'd been. As they talked, Richard caught their reflection in the shop's window. A man and his daughter sharing ice cream and conversation. Something so simple, so ordinary. Something he never thought he'd have. 2 years ago, he would have called this boring, mundane, a waste of time he could spend making money or closing deals. Now he understood this was everything. This was the point of it all. These small, ordinary moments that added up to a life worth living. When they got home, Lily went to put her violin away in the music room. Richard followed and found her standing in front of the photo of her.